All right, go ahead.
All right, everybody. Good evening and welcome. I call to order the regular board meeting on October 23rd, 2025 at 6:30 p.m. in the boardroom of Oak Park and River Forest High School. Please call the roll.
Mr. Grisham,
Here.
Dr. Bill,
Here.
Mr. Arkin,
Here.
Mr. Hurst,
Here.
Dr. Livingston,
Here.
Mr. Randall,
Here.
and Ms. Winsley.
Here. Right. And I move to enter closed session for the purpose of discussing the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the district or legal counsel for the district. And independent contractors and specific volunteers, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee or against legal counsel for the district to determine its validity. However, a meeting to consider an increase in compensation to a specific employee of a public body that is subject to the Local Government Wage Increase Transparency Act may not be closed and shall be open to the public and posted and held in accordance with this act. Collective negotiating matters between the district and its employees or their representatives, or deliberations concerning salary schedules for one or more classes of employees, and litigation when an action is against, affecting, or on behalf of the particular public body has been filed and is pending before a court or administrative tribunal, or when the public body finds that an action is probable or imminent, in which case the basis for the findings shall be reported and entered into the minutes of the closed meeting. Have a second.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Dr. Bill,
Yes.
Mr. Arkin,
Yes.
Mr. Hurst,
Yes.
Mr. Grisham,
Yes.
Mr. Randall,
Yes.
Dr. Livingston,
Yes.
and Ms. Winsley.
Yes. We are reconvening open session at 7:30, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Johnson.
Okay, thank you. We are gonna start with our student showcase tonight, and to kick things off, we have our athletic coordinator, Sir Campbell, in the back there. He's behind the monitor. He's gonna come up and introduce our athletic showcase for the evening.
My name is Kevin Campbell, one of the athletic coordinators. I'm filling in for Nicole Epson, our athletic director tonight. I want to introduce Coach Matt McMurray. He's the head girls varsity golf coach here at O'Hara.
All right, thank you for having us. I'm here to introduce one of my players that made it downstate. We went down to the state tournament a couple weeks ago in Decatur, Illinois.
Turn the mic on, hit the button. Thank you, sir.
We good? Okay, that's good. So Lady of Tana is a special athlete. Just a couple of weeks ago at Hickory Point Golf Course in Decatur, Illinois, I had the privilege of coaching her at her second appearance at the IHSA state finals. She played gritty and determined golf and finished as the 52nd best female golfer in the state of Illinois. Nadia's dedication to the game, attention to detail, and commitment to incremental growth has set her apart from all the athletes I've had the privilege of coaching. She's also a second-year varsity captain and MVP of our golf team for the third consecutive year. It's my privilege to introduce the best female golfer I've coached in almost a decade leading the OPRF varsity program, Nadia Batana. Come on.
Thank you.
That's it? Congratulations.
Okay, and we also have, for our academic showcase here, Dr. Hester here is going to introduce something a little different than what we normally do.
Yes, hello, everyone. You're in for a treat this evening. We have some very special guests. I would like to introduce to you Mr. Anthony Zaveda, who is our Director of Bands, and he's gonna let you know our special guest.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, it's much louder than I thought. Well, good evening, board members, faculty, staff, administrators. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you this evening. For those of you who don't know me, Director of Bands, and also have the honor of being the music department chair. So on behalf of the music department, I'm presenting to you this evening to celebrate a moment of tremendous achievement for our music program. A moment that truly reflects where we are and where we are headed. Every fall, our students participate in the Illinois Music Educators Association, ILMEA, auditions for District 1. District 1 is a very, very large district. It's about 50 or 60 high schools across the Chicagoland area. It does stretch out a little bit west as well. This is not only one of the largest districts in the state, but also widely regarded as the most competitive. Despite that level of competition, I'm proud to announce that over 71% of our students who auditioned were selected this year. That's 60 students who earned this achievement, an impressive number by any standard. Even more extraordinary, all of those students who auditioned for the jazz portion made it, 100% of them. This includes 13 students in jazz, 22 band and orchestra wind players, 13 choir students, 4 students selected for vocal jazz, and 10 string players. That's a lot, and it is the most out of any school in our district. We had an incredible number of students who also earned a much, much more prestigious ranking, and that being #1 in the district. And those students are here tonight. Most of them are here. On jazz bass, Charlie Peterson. Right up there. You'll hear from him in a moment. And district orchestra on clarinet, Lizzie Bell.
So they know we go out.
Go ahead.
Yeah, stand up.
For district band, on trumpet, Bennett King. On bassoon, he wasn't able to make it tonight, Eddie Pearson. On French horn, Lingenfelder. And on bass clarinet, Ray Freilich. And I'm sure have more, we just don't have all those numbers in yet. So we're very anxious to find that out. But if that wasn't enough, like our choir last year, our jazz ensemble has been selected by audition to perform at IMEC, Illinois Music Educators Conference. That's held in January of every year. You may have heard about that. At the end of last year, we found out when school was out. And I wanted to get that information out sooner, but one of the most prestigious invitations in the state for a high school ensemble. Being selected for ILMEA district is more than just an honor. It means these students will perform with top high school musicians in the region. Next month, they will be participating in their prospective district ensembles, working with world-renowned conductors in a professional festival setting that is both challenging and inspiring. It's a direct reflection of our students' talent, discipline, and commitment to our music program, and the supportive and top-rated instruction provided by our music faculty every day. What makes this moment a little more special is that we are seeing a record participation both at the high school and the middle school levels. In band alone, the seventh grade class is over 100 students of band. In the sixth grade class, it's over 140 students in band. This is both a blessing and a challenge as we move towards our school and community goals for Project 3. Just throw that in there. All of our students who earned a spot at the ILMEA district level are not only excelling in music, but are also leaders, collaborators, and deeply engaged members of our school community. To the board, thank you for your continued support of music education. The impact of the support is clear in the accomplishments we are celebrating today. We look forward to sharing more successes with you as our program continues to grow and thrive. And we have a special performance from some of those district members, including our #1 bassist in the district. This is our small but mighty jazz combo. On drum set, this is Will Ryan. As I mentioned in the case, this is Charlie Peterson. On the guitar, Spencer Mamola. And #2, I should say #2 in the district right here. This is Kevin Cabrera on tenor saxophone.
Push the podium out the way.
Thanks so much for letting us share.
That's great. Thank you so much.
That was awesome.
We are going over showcases and I do fear that the Thank you all very much. Okay, we have next up our student council liaison report. And this is not here, we were. Lisa is ours, fabulous.
Hi.
And I know you had a replacement last week.
Yeah, I did. Sorry about
Thank you
that.
for being here.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sabrina Tristano. I'm a senior at OPRF and this year's board representative. I'm also involved in Letters of Love Club and the Future Philanthropist program. I spend my time outside of school working at Oak Park Bread School. I've been a member of student council since freshman year, and I ran for this position because I want to represent students by advocating for their needs and wants. I wanted to start by sharing a few exciting updates from this year's homecoming. My fellow officers and I noticed a lack of student involvement in previous pep rallies, so we made that a priority this year because we really wanted to bring the school spirit. We had 2 students from each grade and 2 teachers compete in mini games, with the winning team getting to pie another team. It was a huge success, the energy was incredible, and it really brought the school together. Homecoming itself was also a major success. We sold 2,480 tickets, and everything at the concession booths was sold out. The enthusiasm from students was amazing and made the event feel really special. Looking ahead, Student Council is starting our teacher appreciation project at our next meetings, where our club members will write letters to teachers. We're excited to give students a chance to show gratitude for teachers' hard work and dedication. I know we brought this up last meeting, but I'm bringing it up again because it's a concern shared by many students. The rule that all doors besides the main entrance close at 8 a.m. With ongoing construction, it's been taking students much longer to get across campus because they can't just cut through the mall, they have to go all the way around the school. I do plan to reach out to our security director and principal to discuss the possibility of a 5-minute grace period after 8 a.m. Students believe this small change could make a big difference. Teachers might see fewer tardies overall, and students wouldn't feel rushed or penalized for delays outside their control. Lastly, I wanted to highlight that this month's wellness initiatives received very positive feedback from students. They had this month students choose from 3 different color objectives, and just the whole wellness period, they could just do whatever they want, and it was a big stress reliever. It's been great seeing so many students engage in activities that support their mental and emotional well-being. Thank you for your time and for continuing to listen to student voices and perspectives.
Okay, and now for my superintendent's announcements. We've already heard a little bit of this first one, but it's worth going after again. So congratulations again. 60 OPRF music students who auditioned in their position in the Illinois Music Educators Association's All District Festival for 2025. This is another record number for our program, with over 70% of our auditioning students being selected. Being selected for the festival is a significant honor, recognizing the highest level of musical excellence across our region. Also in music, for the second competition in a row, the OPRF Marching Huskies earned a spot on the podium. This time at the Downers Grove South Music Bowl. Competing in a larger and more competitive class, the band placed 3rd out of 8 schools. Additional honors included 1st place music ensemble, 2nd place percussion, and 4th place overall out of 21 total bands. Also a huge shout out to head coach Jim Giovannis and the varsity girls football team on their most successful season yet. These talented athletes captured OPRF's first ever flag football regional championship and advanced to the Sweet 16 in the sectional semifinals, where their illustrious season concluded. Congratulations, Huskies. In addition, kudos to senior Julia Henderson on being selected as the Week 6 Chicago Bears Girls Flag Player of the Week. The Bears will donate $500 to a local nonprofit of Julia's choice. And finally, I share an unsolicited email that a community member sent to Principal Parker after encountering some of the 181 leadership and launch students who were participating in our annual City Chase scavenger hunt downtown this past month. Jim L. is a retired high school teacher. He wrote us the following. Be proud of your students and staff. Already this morning, I run across 3 groups of your student leaders on a field trip in the Loop. Who could miss groups of about 15 high school students all dressed in crazy costumes? Each group of kids were extremely friendly, engaged, and engaging. Be proud of your students and their faculty facilitators for representing OPRF so admirably. These young people actively reflect a positive spirit of hope. Congrats, and please feel free to share this with your entire school community. Jim L., we have done that. So thanks for sending this. And that concludes my announcement.
Thank you, Greg. And Ms. Evans, for your status?
11 submitted, 8 resolved.
Great. We're going to move next into our recognition for October. And today we're pleased to continue our employee recognition program for the 25-26 school year. And this program is sponsored by Oak Park Bank, a Wintrust Community Bank. And I'm going to turn it over for a start to Jonathan.
All right, first we would like to congratulate Andrew Brown, English teacher, who was selected as the Teacher of the Month. Here are some of the highlights from the nominations received for Andrew. Students describe Mr. Brown as warm, kind, and supportive. His creative and entertaining teaching inspires learning, his leadership is fair and balanced, and his steady presence makes him essential to the OPR. Congratulations, Andrew. Are you with us? Would you like to say anything? Oh, yeah.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I was just getting off the phone with a teacher with one of my children's parent-teacher conferences. So I'm sorry that I'm not. I wish I could be there in person, but just covering some my own children's conferences. Thank you so much. I so appreciate this. I'm humbled by it, and it's an honor. So just thank you, and I appreciate that we do this, that we celebrate teachers, and so thank you all very much.
And now we'd like to extend congratulations to our Employee of the Month, Lila McGowan, Buildings and Grounds Administrative Assistant. Here are some of the highlights from the nominations received for Lila. Lila streamlines projects with precision, ensures families feel welcome through thoughtful accessibility planning, and uplifts colleagues with their positive spirit, making OPRF more efficient, inclusive, and community focused every day. Great, congratulations, Lila.
I want to say thank you. I feel really honored to get this award, and I have to thank my team at B&G. They're a great group of people to work with, and also my administrative assistant team. They're also a great support and really helped me transition from the fine and applied arts to buildings and grounds, and also have to shout out the fine and applied arts because they're amazing, and they were a great team to work with for 10 years. So thank you all so much.
Here you are.
Thank you.
We would also like to extend congratulations to our guest teacher of the month, Sadie Stewart. Here are some of the highlights from the nomination received for Sadie. Ms. Stewart excelled as a long-term guest teacher, keeping students engaged and supported. She collaborated with colleagues, enriched lessons with her own strategies, and built such trust that students jokingly called Ms. Heineman Ms. Stewart upon her return. Congratulations, Sadie.
I just want to say how grateful and honored I am to accept this award. It's not always easy to walk into somebody else's classroom and teach their lesson plans and implement their routines and create a community on a community that's already kind of been built. And so this experience was so wonderful for me. I learned so many new things. I was challenged in the right ways, and I got to work with some amazing teachers in this building. So I truly am just so grateful. I think my favorite takeaway is actually I experienced it more this year, because this year now when I walk into a math class, a science class, PE, I see familiar names on my rosters. I see familiar faces. I hear, "What's up, Miss Stewart?" from down the hallway, and I'm like, so that just makes this job so much more special. So thank you so much. Thank you for these awards. You guys recognize that it truly does take a village to do what we do. And I'm just really grateful to be a part of this one. So thank you.
And we have one more. We'd also like to extend congratulations to our volunteer of the month, Rika Rajkumar from Applause. Here are some of the highlights from the nominations received for Rika. Rika is a dedicated volunteer whose calm presence, tireless support, and financial stewardship as Applause treasurer ensures OPRF arts programs thrive. She makes tough tasks effortless and strengthens every event. Congratulations, Rika.
Well, thank you, and just congratulations to all of our folks who are recognized, for teachers and volunteers and administrators. It takes a village, as Lady said, to make this happen. So, congrats again. And now we're going to move over and see if there are any public comments.
None.
No public comments. And so, with that, we are going to move into our consent agenda. Before doing so, are there any items that anyone wants to pull for discussion? So hearing none, I move to approve the consent items as follows. A, approval of open and closed session minutes of September 25th and October 9th, 2025, and a declaration that the audio tapes of December 2023 be destroyed. B, approval of the personnel recommendations, including new hires, assignment changes, resignations, and leave of absence as presented. C, approval of resolutions directing a transfer of $5 million from the Education Fund to the Capital Projects Fund and $4 million from the Operations and Maintenance Fund to the Capital Projects Fund. D, approval of the August 2025 Treasurer's Report as presented. E, approval of the August 2025 Finance Report as presented. And F, approval of the September and October 2025 check disbursements and financial resolutions, including the payroll resolutions for November 2025.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Greenhouse,
Yes.
Mr. Gertz,
Yes.
Dr. Livingston,
Yes.
Dr. Odell,
Yes.
Mr. Grigsby,
Yes.
Mr. Arkin,
Yes.
and Ms. Williams-Lee.
Yes. And then next on the agenda are our action items. And for our action item, I move to approve the following action items. Approval of the 2026-2027 course recommendations as presented.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? Okay, please call the roll.
Mr. Gertz,
Yes.
Dr. Livingston,
Yes.
Mr. Grigsby,
Yes.
Mr. Arkin,
Yes.
Dr. Odell,
Yes.
Mr. Greenhouse.
Yes.
And Ms. Williams-Lee.
Yes. Now we are going to move into our discussion items. And first, and we have the tax levy adoption. Ms. Evans? Dr. Evans?
This kicks off the beginning of our tax levy season. I will turn over to Brian in just a minute to go through a presentation, just for our new board members. Generally speaking, this will time out to where we'll take the initial presentation to our community finance committee that was done at our prior meeting. And then get their feedback or recommendations, we bring it forward here for discussion. There'll be no action or vote tonight. That will happen in November at the tentative levy process. And then the levy will go on display and final vote will happen in December. So with that, Ryan, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Tony. So Tony's kind of touched on our tax levy timeline for this year. So I'm going to go ahead and move right into the start of our PowerPoint presentation here. And I just wanted to kick some things off with some property tax terminology that you'll hear referenced tonight. The tax levy is the amount of money that a district requests to be raised from property taxes. It's important to know that that amount could potentially be different from the tax extension, which is the actual amount of taxes that get billed by Cook County on our behalf. After the levy is filed, the property within our district goes through an assessment process to determine an equalized assessed value. That EAV is the taxable value of a property after a county-wide equalization factor gets applied to ensure that the property assessments across the state are uniform. Once that is done, a tax rate can be calculated for the district by dividing the tax extension by total EAV. Then we have the Property Tax Extension Limitation Law, or PTEL, which was enacted in Cook County in 1994 to control the growth of property tax levies for school districts and other governments. PTEL is also commonly referred to as the tax cap because it limits the increase of the annual tax levy to either CPI or 5%, whichever is less in a given year. And that's before taking into account new property. So when we say new property, we're talking about anything that gets added to the tax base during the year. Mainly that will include new construction, but it can also factor in improvements to existing property, expiring TIF districts, or property that is changing in status from exempt property to now taxable property. CPI is another acronym that will come into play with the tax levy frequently. And when we say CPI in relation to a tax levy, that's coming from the Consumer Price Index for Urban Consumers, or CPIU. And it's the increase from the previous December. So in this table here, we have some historical values for CPI. And you can see that going back to 2012, CPI rarely went above 2%. Until 2021, when all of a sudden we had 2 straight years of substantial inflation and the CPI reached 7% and then 6.5%. So in those years, the 5% limitation of the PTEL formula kicked in. However, since then, CPI has gradually been coming back down. So the cap applicable to the current levy year is 2.9%. Then the column on the right side of the table shows the actual CPI that District 200 levied for each year. The values in red are indicating years where District 200 levied less than the PTEL limit. So the 3 most recent levies were all less than CPI. And then if you go further back, there were 4 additional years where no CPI increase was built into the levy. And I'll circle back to provide some additional background on the reason for that in a couple slides here.
Is CPI levied by D200 an accurate description? Shouldn't it be the percentage, just the percentage change in the levy from D200? Because it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to CPI, right?
It does not have to be tied to CPI. In different levy years, the district chose to levy for the CPI increase and not new property. And then there was at least 1 year where the district levied for new property, but not CPI. So to kind of tie the CPI variable to how much of that CPI the district levied for, I was trying to do more of an apples to apples comparison there. So if you were looking at the overall levy increase, it would be slightly different than what you saw on that slide.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so then there are two components of the levy formula that have to be estimated. And that's because they're not finalized by Cook County until several months after the levy gets adopted. The first of those variables is new property. And if we look at District 200's history for new property, 2019 will stand out as an outlier because there were 2 Village of Oak Park TIFs that expired that year and became taxable property. But in the 5 years since then, the district has still experienced a fairly steady stream of new property added to its tax base. Sometimes new property information can be difficult to gather due to the timing of the property assessment process, but the village publishes some planning and community development reports that help us develop our estimate each year. Using those resources, we've identified that there are several multi-unit residential buildings and commercial spaces that are expected to be completed in 2025 or have already been completed this year in some cases. So we've developed an estimate of $17 million for new property this year. When it comes to EAV, the important thing to note is that properties in Cook County are subject to reassessment every 3 years. In the last few reassessment years, such as 2023, the district's EAV has experienced some substantial increases of 20 or even 30%. Then in the 2 years following reassessment, there tends to be smaller changes, and frequently we'll see decreases in EAV as appeals tend to have a larger impact in those years. So following that trend for years when there's no reassessment, we're estimating a decrease of 0.5% for the district's EAV this levy year. The other critical piece of the story when it comes to the history of the tax levy is District 200's finances. As of 2013, the district had accumulated a fund balance of over 200% of annual expenses. Since then, the district made a concerted effort with its annual tax levy to slow the growth of property taxes beyond what was already limited by PTEL. Some of those efforts included operating levy reductions, various types of levy abatements, and then not taking full CPI increases, as we saw a few slides back. Because the PTEL limiting rate calculation is based on the previous year's extension, levying less than CPI not only impacts the current levy year, but it also has a cumulative effect on future years. And that concept is really illustrated by the chart on this slide, where the black line represents the rate at which the district's tax extension could have increased if it had continued asking for the maximum allowable amount under PTEL every year. Then the blue line shows OPRF's actual levy extensions. So the gap in between is money that the district elected not to levy for, and that amounts to about $87 million over the last 12 years. These levy control initiatives, along with the use of reserves to pay for capital projects, are why the fund balance is scheduled to return to a more normal level by the end of this fiscal year. And we saw that when we were discussing or when the budget was approved for fiscal year 26. The last point I'll make on this slide is you'll notice the chart includes an orange line branching off from the blue one. And that represents dollars from the 2023 and 2024 levies that could potentially be recouped using a levy recapture. And we'll get into more details on how that works here in a little bit. Now, before we move forward to levy options, let's quickly recap part of our discussion in August regarding the district's financial outlook. So in the recently approved budget, we noted a sizable jump in costs related to our special education program. When those budget numbers were added to the financial projection model and then carried forward using our standard set of assumptions, the cumulative effect of those additional expenses caused the district's fund balance to decline at a faster rate than previously predicted, and ultimately fall below the 25% boundary of our fund balance target range by 2028. We also discussed how the county has been unreliable with its property tax distribution schedule in recent years. So if we're being fiscally prudent, we should really consider maintaining a fund balance of at least 33%. That would give us a 4-month safety net to combat potential tax delays in the future, like the ones we've seen in 3 of the last 4 years. The challenge obviously lies in getting to that point. It can't be solved by making a singular change somewhere in the budget. It'll most likely require a blended approach of revenue and expense adjustments, as well as a plan for how future capital improvements should be funded. Also back in August, we looked at one possibility of how this might be accomplished. This particular example included a partial tax levy recapture to generate more revenue, a target for reducing operating expenditures, and an adjustment to the capital improvement plan that eliminated the use of operating fund balance transfers for capital projects. The combination of those 3 strategies allowed the fund balance percentage at the bottom of the slide to hold steady around that 33% target. So I've made a reference a couple times now to a property tax levy recapture. So this will be an important concept to understand as we begin talking about levy scenarios. The recapture ability first became possible when a new section of the property tax code was signed into law in 2022. The basic premise is, if a district chooses to levy less than the amount permitted by PTEL, it can opt to recapture the difference in one of the next 3 levy years, as long as 3 criteria are met. The first is a certification must be filed with the county clerk in the year it levied less than the maximum. Second, the district cannot use a recapture to cause its levy to exceed the 5% PTEL limit in any given year. And then third, the district must have a recognition or review financial designation from ISB in the year it wants to recapture. So ISB has 4 categories that it classifies school districts in based on financial performance. Recognition or review would be the highest or second highest category. Currently, OPRF is in the highest category. Then, as noted earlier, District 200 levied less than the maximum several times recently. In both 2023 and 2024, the required certification was filed with the county, which then provided the opportunity to recapture those dollars in the future if desired. Recapturing is not required, but it gives the district that flexibility. The total amount underextended in those 2 years was about $2.1 million. So $1.1 million pertains to the 2023 levy, and that would be scheduled to expire by 2026 if not recaptured. And then $1 million is from the 2024 levy, which would expire by 2027. Any questions on recapture or any of the previous data before we move into scenarios? Okay. So we have 4 levy scenarios that have been prepared for tonight. And while the board will only be taking action on the 2025 tax levy here in a couple months, the district's financial position requires that we take more of a long-term view when developing our levy strategy. So each levy scenario that you'll see tonight will present information for not only the 2025 levy year, but also some assumptions for future levies to help quantify the impact on other areas within the projections. Picking one of these scenarios does not lock the board into the assumptions associated with the future years, but it just kind of gives you an idea of, if we maintain that scenario as shown tonight, what our financials could potentially look like 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road. So scenario 1 calls for the levy to increase by CPI plus new property each year. This is the standard assumption from our financial projection model, and it ignores the concept of any levy recapture. So in 2025, that would mean a levy of 2.9% for CPI, plus roughly 0.5% attributable to new property, for an overall levy increase of 3.48%. The estimated impact to a homeowner with an assessed value of $400,000 would be an increase of $104 in taxes owed for District 200. In future years, levies would continue increasing by CPI, and the CPI assumption in our projection model is currently at 2%. So this next slide then looks at what this means for our projection model. And to help make comparisons between these options, each scenario was created so that the fund balance to expenditure ratio at the bottom of the projection in green does not fall below 33%. The only way to maintain that percentage is to add a dollar amount to the row highlighted in orange, labeled reduction target for expenditures or transfers. And the reason it's called that is because the amount shown could either be applied as an offset to the total expenditures line, thereby reducing the amount we spend on operations, or the transfers to capital line, which would reduce the amount of operating funds we're devoting to capital projects. A reduction in the transfers to capital line also has a trickle-down effect, because the capital expenses those transfers were funding would then either need to be postponed or would require an alternative source of financing, such as a debt issuance. So in scenario 1, we'd be looking at a reduction target of $1.2 million beginning in fiscal year 27, and a total of $18.5 million over a 4-year period. It's also worth pointing out that by fiscal year 28, the reduction target of $4.3 million is already greater than the scheduled transfer for capital. So eliminating that transfer would not be enough on its own to reach the targeted fund balance in that particular year. And that again emphasizes this need for a multi-layered solution.
Can you clarify the transfers to capital? We're talking more like the maintenance projects for capital, like top line, top line.
Yeah, this would be not reference to the major projects, but our fiscal year CIP work that we.
Thank you.
All right, so then as we move on to scenario 2, the remaining scenarios that you'll see all explore the possibility of using the levy recapture to help with the fund balance solution. So scenario 2 takes the stance that the entire $2.1 million that was under levied in the previous 2 years should be recaptured as soon as possible. However, the full $2.1 million can't be mathematically recaptured in 1 year because it would violate that 5% PTEL cap. If the district decided to levy 5% for CPI this year, it would be able to recapture about $1.7 million. Doing so would mean an overall levy increase of 5.58% in 2025 after accounting for new property. This scenario would be the largest immediate impact to the taxpayer, as the estimated increase in taxes owed for D200 on that $400,000 home would be $167. Looking ahead, scenario 2 also assumes that in 2026, the district levies about 0.5% more than the eventual CPI factor to recapture the remaining $400,000 of revenue. The impact of scenario 2 on the projections is that the reduction target could theoretically be pushed out by 1 year because the additional levy revenue would keep the fund balance above 33% next year. But then in fiscal year 28, the budget would need to be reduced by 1.5 million, and a total of 9.7 million would be needed over the final 3 years of the projection. Scenario 3 also incorporates a levy recapture, but it focuses more on smoothing out the annual levy by the levy increases by limiting the increase to 3.5% for CPI plus new property each year. What makes this scenario unique is that we don't know how much of the $2.1 million available for recapture would end up being realized, because it's entirely dependent on future CPI values. If CPI approximates the 2% assumption in our projection model, levy increases of 3.5% would still end up recapturing the entire 2.1 million by the year 2027. However, if CPI remains closer to 3% like this year, those same levy increases could result in some of the recapture being forfeited. Despite the uncertainty regarding CPI, the benefit of this scenario is a less disruptive impact to the taxpayer, while still ensuring a minimum amount of levy revenue for the district. Using a 3.5% factor for CPI in the 2025 levy produces an estimated overall levy increase of 4.09%, and it recaptures about $500,000 in the first year. The estimated tax impact to the owner of a $400,000 home then is an increase of $123 owed for District 200. Then looking at the projections for scenario 3, it requires a $700,000 reduction target for expenditures or transfers beginning in fiscal year 27. The 4-year total is still significant at 11.2 million, but the smoothing effect of the revenue results in the reduction amount escalating at a rate that is less pronounced than the previous 2 scenarios. Then our final levy scenario is sort of a hybrid approach to scenarios 2 and 3. And this scenario was kind of flushed out during our CFC meeting as we were talking about the levy. Scenario 4 assumes the district takes the full amount of available recapture, but it does so over the course of 3 levy years in equal installments of $700,000 per year. So for 2025, this means an overall levy increase of 4.4% for the district, and the owner of the $400,000 home experiences an estimated increase of $132 in taxes owed for District 200. As we look at the projections, scenario 4 has a very similar outlook to scenario 3, given our current set of assumptions. The 4-year total of the reduction target for expenditures and transfers is identical between the 2 scenarios at 11.2 million. But because the 2025 levy is slightly higher in scenario 4, the reduction target starts lower in year 1 at $400,000 and ends up a little higher in year 2. So some of you may be wondering, what's really the difference between scenarios 3 and 4? And the answer is that it depends on future CPI. Remember that scenario 3 limits the annual levy increases to 3.5% plus new property. Scenario 4, on the other hand, is recapturing the $700,000 per year, and that's regardless of where future CPIs land. So if the CPI in future years is 2%, like we have in our projection model, the district would be able to recapture the full 2.1 million without ever going over 3.5% for levy increases. In other words, both scenarios would wind up in the same place 3 years from now. However, if future CPI values wind up being higher, scenario 4 starts to branch off. So that's this orange line on the chart. And that generates more levy revenue for the district. In particular, this occurs at a CPI greater than 2.6%, because the extra $700,000 of annual recapture pushes the levy increases over the 3.5% cap that is being utilized in scenario 3. So this kind of gives you a visual of, as CPI, or future CPI, I should say, so the unknown future CPI goes up, how levy scenario 3 in blue would compare to the levy scenario 4 in orange. After evaluating the various scenarios, the CFC landed on scenario 4 as its recommended option. And a couple things made scenario 4 appealing to the committee. The first is that the additional costs for special education in the fiscal year 26 budget were unexpected and uncontrollable. So there is a rationale for levying a little more now as an offset. Secondly, CPI has recently been hovering in the 2.5% to 3% range. If it remains there through December, scenario 4's recapture methodology would still be smoothed over 3 years for taxpayers. In the event that CPI goes higher, the board would still have the option in future years of continuing to recapture or to just accept the CPI increase for the levy in those years. And having said all that, though, the committee also viewed the levy recapture as just one piece to the overall puzzle. From a long-range planning standpoint, they stressed the importance of finding ways to reduce operating expenses, and several members also expressed interest in doing a deep dive into the EBF gap analysis and some other financial benchmarking tools to help identify areas for potential cost savings. This last slide was then included just for informational purposes for anyone who might want to explore the financial impact of a levy scenario other than the 4 that were presented tonight. So it's pointing out that for each 0.1% of CPI that the district levies, it generates about $85,000 of additional revenue in year 1. And then it will take about $1 million of additional revenue to increase our operating fund balance to expense ratio by 1%. So as you put those two data points together, if we wanted fund balance to be 1% higher at the end of the year, we could levy 4.1% for CPI instead of 2.9%, because that 1.2% of additional CPI works out to about $1 million. And with that, I will turn it back over to the board for discussion and questions.
Thanks, Brian. Questions?
I'm sorry, Grant. Okay. So I do appreciate that you on one of the first slides looking at new property history, elucidate that the large number of new property in 2019 is largely due to the T.O. Park TIFs expiring. Do we know of any that are coming up that are expiring? Any significant ones?
There's 2 TIFs in progress with River Forest, but we are not nearing expiration on those.
The reason I'm curious is that I know that though not to my knowledge, there's been any significant new legislation around TIFs, but I know it's a huge priority as a salient topic for ISB in the coming year and preceding years. I wonder if just really how much of that was taken into account, the meaningful sort of commitment to tip reform and in looking at how maybe we should be a little more bearish in how we approach this currently, than more aggressive in increasing levy.
And Brian, feel free to jump in. My initial response would be, I think as we get further down the road and it's not in the near future. I'd have to go back and look at exactly when the two river forest tips expire. But given that we don't have that opportunity to recapture any of that revenue at this point, it wasn't a big factor here. I think it could be something that, you know, if a new tip was brought forward by one of the villages, something that we'd have to take a hard look at to see what the financial ramifications would be for our district. But because we don't have the ability to tap into that revenue at this point, I do not believe we've calculated any of that in over the next 5 years.
That's correct. We have not. The two TIFs that are in progress currently originated in 2016 and 2018, and the standard life of a TIF district is 23 years. So we would not be looking at expiration on those till somewhere close to 2040.
Three quick things. So first of all, slide 20, because it's not labeled, just for the avoidance of doubt, define the y-axis for us. Slide 20.
The y-axis is the cumulative levy revenues that would be brought in over the next 5 years.
Okay, let's pull up 20, slide 20 on the screen. Oh, sorry.
There you go. Nope, I just clicked over to it. You're good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so 462, 459, 456. Tell us what that is again?
The values going across the bottom?
No, the vertical values on the left.
Oh, okay. The vertical values on the left would be cumulative tax levy revenues for our district over the next 5 years.
In millions, right?
In millions, yes.
Missing a label, I think, is what's confusing about.
Oh, yes, thank you. I will get that added.
The other thing I want to mention is on the 4 different scenarios, there are reduction targets that become necessary between about 9 million to 18 million. If we go with scenario 4, it's a reduction target of 11. But it's not equally distributed over the 4 projection years. There's kind of an upward slope. But Tony, I'll give you a chance to talk about tools and toolbox, so to speak, because the reduction targets can come from both transfers to capital as well as operating expenses. I want you to talk about, you know, manipulating those tools in order to avoid what looks on paper to be potentially a big balloon type of penalty. And then also talk about what is your ability to shift some of the back end reduction target requirements up a little bit, so it's less of a slope going like that, and it looks less like a ticking time bomb.
Sure. There's because this is a projection forward, there's a lot of options to do so. The first being if the board is curious as to why, you know, we're seeing different numbers than when we presented the budget, where it's just a solid straight reduction number. We took the approach of what would it look like to hold it at that 33%. So we targeted more what we felt would be a safe fund balance within our policy. There's a myriad of ways we can do that. As we go out to bid for our capital improvement projects, for example, this is kind of an early one. We can look at some of the projects we can bid as alternates. And if we have a good bid day, if we set a threshold of say, if we had budgeted 5 million and now we want to really plan for 4 million, we can bid it out and say, okay, of the work we know has to be done right away. If that comes in at a certain threshold, do we have the ability then to save money, on a good bid day, or if it's a poor bid day, then we're not tied to something that's too high. We can look at, the trends in our projections as well. Let's say 2 years in, we notice that, maybe we, make a change to, contract with busing, and we see that number come down. Well, reducing a bus expense by 3% to 2%, what does that do to the final number? And then look at other efficiencies within the budget, that we can, find areas of savings in, and that would be kind of a holistic approach, done with Brian and myself and our departments in terms of, if we had to reduce costs in one way, how can we do that? If we set it as a percentage, should we set it as a dollar amount? There's a lot of work that goes into that. So those are some of the tools. I don't think I can tell you today we have necessarily the plan that's going to get us to that reduction, but it is something that CFC spent a lot of time discussing at our last meeting, in terms of building out subcommittees and the work that would go into it, to kind of find this balance of revenue and expense adjustments that keep us in a safe spot.
Thank you.
First of all, Tony and Brian, excellent work. This is thorough and thoughtful, as we've come to expect from you guys. I also just wanted to comment about the work of the CFC and its sort of ever evolving increase in expertise. I was really impressed by the fact that that scenario 4 came out of the discussion at the CFC, and that's impressive work, and it's certainly a testament to board members who have been at Odell and of course Tom Kopsky and the leadership of CFC. So gratitude there as well. I'm really curious about the 33%. All of this analysis hinges on using 33%. Where does that come from?
So when you think of that 33%, what it equates to is having essentially 33% of a year's worth of money in the bank. And if you would take a year like this year, many Cook County districts have had to go to their boards and issue TAWs, tax anticipation warrants, because we still have not received any property tax revenue from Cook County. Because of our current fund balance situation, we've been able to weather that storm. We looked and said, okay, at a 26% fund balance or 28% fund balance, we may have had to look at issuing tax anticipation warrants. But at 33%, we felt that, if we had that amount right now, if it was today, we would have been okay. So it's looking at, not going to the very bottom of our policy, but what fiscally was the kind of the most sound practice, and the recommendation of Brian and I. And I will say at CFC, we had members that agreed with that approach, and we had members that disagreed with that approach. So it's just a approach to these recommendations.
What was that conversation? Were there people that said we should be analyzing against 25%, or that we should be higher than 30%?
Correct me if I'm wrong. I did not hear anybody advocate higher than 33%. There were some that felt that they would be comfortable getting closer to the 25% range, at least prior to knowing, what type of expense reduction we were talking about.
From the memo and from what you said tonight, so it sounds like that 33% comes from the idea that 3 out of the last 4 years, we've had this huge delay in receiving property tax revenue. And so we are trying to make sure that a third of the year is covered with their reserves. So that's what that is, a third of the year.
Correct.
30%. Okay. But our policy is 25 to 50, and we're not recommending that we change that.
No, I would say going over 50 puts us back in the scenario that the board and the district and the CFC have worked to get out of, too large of a fund balance. And going below the 25% puts us at risk of the state of Illinois saying we are not a financially sound district.
Okay, so that 33% target, you're saying that is the best prudent approach. Is the administration recommending one of the scenarios?
Right now, and I think Brian and I both felt extremely comfortable with scenario 4. It was, I think both of us, our brains tend to think the same way. So as it was being discussed, we both felt it would work. And then when we were able to kind of go back the next day and Brian put it all on paper and we laid it out, the scenario 4 seemed to make a lot of sense.
And what do you see as the benefit to scenario 4 versus scenario 3?
To me, scenario 4 smooths in the recapture on a dollar basis and not a percentage basis. And one, it doesn't put that risk of a high CPI forcing us to not go to a recapture. Because if CPI, let's say we had a year where CPI came in at 3.4%. From a revenue standpoint, that may be a good thing, but that also means we are likely seeing 3 to 4 to 5% increases in a lot of expenses, where at a 2% increase, it means we're seeing 2 to 3% increases in expenses. So it allows us to control what expenses we're seeing reduced a little bit more.
So really, because we don't know what future CPI is going to be, it's given that stability. Okay, that's all. Thanks.
Yeah, I'd like to echo prior remarks. I'm always very impressed by the business office and the financials that are prepared. Can you speak to the philosophy behind the recapture? What is the justification for going back and recapturing that otherwise untaxed revenue?
We viewed, when I think about when I first started here, claiming that recapture's ability was knowing that we wouldn't have the fund balance, in 3 to 4 years at that time that we did at that point. The days of the 75% fund balance would be, allow ourselves the ability to recapture down the road were present, but we knew they were going away. We described them previously as kind of a break glass scenario. If we saw a scenario where, like we're seeing now, that special education expenses just had skyrocketed, and the district was looking at needing to recapture some of that money, we would do so at that time, but then having not raise those taxes in the prior years to our taxpayers as well. So when you recapture, you're essentially reclaiming dollars in future years, but you're not looking back and getting dollars from prior years that you've left on the table as well.
So, I mean, I guess I have a bit of a problem, right, because previously the district has been very, has applauded itself for not taxing on access as it has done in previous years, and that it has been fiscally sound and has been conservative and conscious of taxpayer dollars. But then we're saying, well, we spent a little bit too much, or we think we're going to spend a little bit too much, so we go back and kind of take a piece of that pie back, in future years, right? I have a bit of a problem with the idea of like it being there for us to take. I understand it is under the law, but at the end of the day, that we should still just have our sound fiscal policy. Hey, the private sector is what we after prior expenses, right? So I think if it was up to me today, right, I'd be in favor of scenario 1, right? I don't like the idea of the recapture. And I think that between the 33% and, keep in mind, right, our ability to transfer funds to capital funds, operating expenses to capital funds, right? That sunsets with that current act as it stands today, right? You wouldn't be able to do that in the future without some sort of a going out for a special capital levy. Is that correct?
No, it's stricter ruling around transfer requirements, but the ability to transfer between funds and for capital work is something that was, it predated COVID and it will post-date the sunset of these rules as well.
Okay.
Yeah, there's been flexibility to transfer to capital projects at any time. The one that has sunset periodically and then kind of been reinstated is the law that talks about transferring within your operating fund. So this would be like transferring between your education fund and your transportation fund, or between your operations and maintenance fund and your transportation fund. That statute has come close to expiring a few times, and each time the legislature has decided to extend it.
And the other thing that I'd like the board to consider when you talk about, incremental increases to the levy, viewing it from the taxpayers' dollars, taxpayers' experience, saying that value of 400,000 is we're giving a cumulative value of not just this district, this tax body, but also what we're seeing in the other tax bodies in Oak Park and River Forest. We have some bargaining going on in the schools in River Forest, as well as the middle elementary schools here. So, about $100 per 400,000 doesn't seem like a lot. I think, people are staring down very high expenses, living expenses, right? The death by 1,000 cuts is just very threat to taxpayers. So I'd like us all to be very cognizant of that, just not compartmentalizing it. This only.
I'll just share, sorry, do you want to go first? Let you go and then I'll respond.
Oh, no, I'm okay, go ahead.
Okay, I just want to share, Josh, I raised that same kind of question about the philosophical thinking behind the recapture in the CLC meeting, and I think we had a good discussion there. With the takeaway being, if there are material changes, if the situation today is different from unexpectedly and unavoidably different from the way we thought it might be when the previous decision was made, that's kind of exactly the reason for the recapture opportunity. So I think in the case that we're seeing here, there are at least two things that Tony and Brian are bringing to the table, one of which is the special education costs, which have gone up by really even more than we're talking about recapturing on an annual basis. And the other thing is the unpredictability with the county, meaning that we really do want to aim for that higher 33% level. So those are the two pieces of sort of evidence or argument in my mind that makes me feel comfortable with that, even though I'm with you on the idea that, we have to be judicious about that recapture action, but I think personally, to me, it makes sense in this case.
So if I think as far as that's concerned, right, if the idea of breaking glass in case of an emergency, right, or that something was unforeseeable and we just kind of ran up against an expense, that 5% cap, we could go to levy, right? So if we had ever, go out for referendum, sorry, thank you. So if we felt that it was very compelling and we made the argument and the people would agree with us, then at that point, that's when you go to the referendum. It's not like that we could never ask for more money. So, and that's what the referendum process is for, is when you think that there are some sort of, special circumstances that would warrant these additional expenses, whether it's a project or looking at additional expenses that we're looking to see. That's where, I want to be very confident. And then the 33%, I'm looking at these expenses that we could cut, right, a few million, in situation one where we go up to $7 million in a given year and change. I think that, we can find either based on the modeling, a little bit of room. I also I don't want to bet on Cook County. I've never wanted to bet on Cook County. allegedly the technological issues are going to be done after this transfer to the new system is. So I don't know if we'd see the same thing 3 years from now that we need to delay 4 months. The same way that we are today. So I think I understand and I appreciate the cushion that we have based on some of these assumptions, but I think that we can navigate them without a recapture. That's just where I'm coming from.
Yep, and just certainly appreciate everything, the points you made. I think when I look at the recapture law being newer in the spirit of it, I think it was written for scenarios similar to this in the sense of historically districts would just every year maximize that the CPI. They just ask for the full amount, they'd ask for over the 5% and then get their full CPI. Because there was this uncertainty going down the road. I think the hardest part in comparing our expenses to the private sector is that we don't have a product that we can raise 5% or 10% to offset. Our revenues are pretty fixed outside of our property taxes. So it's a little bit, when we have that, we solve it through expense cuts or a blended approach. What I liked about scenario 4 was instead of going after a large amount of recapture right away, let's say something changes and all of a sudden Illinois comes out and says, in 2 years, we're going to see CPPRT skyrocket again, as we did during the pandemic. Then we say, okay, but our scenario has changed. We don't need to recapture the second portion of this year. And then that money would sunset over that 3-year period. So while we can't project kind of I think it'd be a little too aggressive to project something like that. It does give us that ability to not go back to the well if we don't have to.
Thank you.
You have a question?
I was gonna answer any questions.
It was just like general, yeah. It was just general, cause like I was listening, cause I was kind of thinking off, earlier in the discussion that like, like, cause the 33%, is that, like, is it cushy enough that we don't have to do the levy, but that's what it is clear. Because, and then you're saying now that you can do the levy and then choose not to, is there like something, is there some like benefit to doing that? Is like, how that is different from just.
Excuse me. Yes, so every year we go through this process and we do it with the best set of information we have available at that time to predict our revenues and expenses. But while we're talking about recapturing $2.1 million over 3 years, really what we'd be recommending for the purpose of the levy hearing is recapturing $700,000 for year 1. And then we, at this time next year, would look at the updated scenarios and the updated numbers and what our reality is at that point and say, do we need to recapture $700,000? Do we need to recapture $300,000 or $400,000? Do we recapture 0? It's this unique both long-term and short-term look that we're talking about.
Do you have anything?
No. Yeah.
I'm just gonna preface this by saying that I'm reticent to utilize a recapture. Okay, I think it's something that we told our taxpayers that we're not gonna tax this amount, and then all of a sudden, oops, something changes, now we're gonna go back and tax you again. It just doesn't sit well with me. And I understand it may be a necessity. However, I'd like to think from the point of view, I've got a few questions. First is, what would we be doing if the law hadn't changed? Right, what would the actions we be taking as a board if we couldn't go back and recapture? And I don't think we've dug deep enough in looking maybe at some of our expense reductions. And I brought this up last time. All right, there's gonna be 159 less students in this building, all right, at the end of, in the school year 2029-2030 than there is today. And that remains in the projection of a flat FTE with no reduction in force. Although we're losing whatever percentage that is of our student body. I just don't think that that's a deep enough dive, so to say. In looking at some of these expenses. Now, there's $2 million. It came up on us like this. First we heard of it was few months ago. All right, why? Why? If these kids are within our district, don't we know and have the information that they will be coming up? And couldn't we have known that there would have been this kind of escalation in cost, a year or 2 years ago, because we knew we were gonna have to accommodate these kids? Don't we get that kind of data? Or shouldn't we be getting that kind of data? Do you want to?
I can.
Sure.
Actually, so you asked two questions here.
Okay.
You're teaming me on the second. Are there more questions before we jump in and respond? Do you want to get them all and then we'll jump in?
I'll get the, because I think I'm really getting one more.
Thank you.
And is the other question I have about this additional spend primarily in special ed is, how do we know this is not an aberration? How do we know it's not akin to the 7% CPI in 2021 or whatever year it was? That's like, okay, and we don't know that it's gonna eventually come back to level, right? And so these are things that I question, kind of trying to look at it from in the clouds. But one of my concerns is, hey, have we really done enough work on the expense side? All right, of the budget, all right, to justify asking for the additional taxes.
To answer a couple of those questions, and Dr. Johnson, feel free to jump in. In talking with our special education department during the budgeting process, a lot of this information just is not available prior to when these students enter our district. I think that was one of the first questions Brian and I asked was, what does this mean, not just for this year, but down the road? Is this going to come down? And the answer was looking at the placements of these students and the needs of the students that had entered our district. No, that they were going to be here consistently over the life of these 5-year projections. The FTE to student ratio is a good one, and it's one that needs to be analyzed. But it also it's a little outside of my swim lane when we talk about personnel. But I think one of the tough things is that as we look about if somebody retires, if a French teacher retires, we can't just shift a math teacher over because that's what the numbers say to do. My brain works that way. It says yes, it should work that way, but it doesn't. So the but we're really we're getting into that deep dive of those expenses to find where the savings can be, to find not just on a personnel level, but making tough decisions. We made a tough recommendation with insurance 2 weeks ago. But because we had to hold the line and not see insurance exceed what was in the projections. Arguments, or I shouldn't say arguments, but contract negotiations with different vendors we use, and do we have the right ones, and are they the right costs, and do they make sense? The phrase, death by 1,000 paper cuts was used a minute ago. In some ways, that's how we're going to need to attack the reductions as well. Is you might find you're trying to save $3 million, you might find it $1 million pretty easily. But then it's all the little reductions that have to add up as well to get us there. And that's the process we are in right now.
Well, I want to be clear too, just the first one, I'm starting to in talk with Andy, that we do have knowledge of our local leaders and what's going to come to us through their special education funds. What we have here, and we build those into our projections as we go. What happened here was unanticipated transfers into those feeders activated on the projections and transfers from elsewhere. So these are situations that were beyond our initial understanding of what was coming our way, beyond our initial understanding of those programs. So those programs are growing regardless.
So, I guess my question is that if there's an increase this year in because of these services, all right, and we don't have the now, I mean, we don't have the knowledge of what of this before they come because they're not in our feeder system.
Yes, that's part of it.
Okay, then we really don't know what's gonna come next year or the year after. So it could go up, it could double, it could be half.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's gonna provide more variance. You know, which would give us less confidence in what our budget is.
If I recall correctly, wasn't there something to do with that we, even despite us having the revenue and the visit, the recs out, right, we just couldn't staff up to the demand. And it resulted in us going to staffing companies to fill the gap a lot, which came at a greater expense to the district than it is to me as well. So
That's part of it, but that is actually accurately remembered, but in addition to, we're talking about placements outside of District 200, that is the main driver here.
Okay.
And so, and that's a bigger piece of it, and so while we were speaking about unanticipated and kind of unknown numbers that came throughout this process, also understand that the costs for these programs by no means remain, flat or growing at a steady rate. I mean, it has hit us, and it's hit us harder since the pandemic and certainly extent before. So that is one factor. Your main point though about this potential being volatile, right, is one way or the other, is a fair one. It's worth considering. I think because we don't know that, the assumption. And we definitely also find, we say this, and we all know this, because of the special education service that we provide, OPRF, it is a target campus, right? It is a campus that families want their kids to go to because of the services we provide. And so we built into our assumptions, Tony, Brian, correct me if in any way I'm wrong on this, but we built into our assumptions the idea that once here, they will be here, right, through the projections that we have spoken about here for this time. So, yes, all I'm saying is part of the variability or the unknown, for sure.
Right, so, but I think also what you're projecting though is continued growth. In because as you lose your senior class, you're bringing in a new freshman class. And we don't know what that next year's new freshman class is going to bring us. That's my point.
I
see. The other thing too that factors into our projection of growth is that the way and I'll oversimplify this a little bit, but the way the laws are, there is not a lot of district control over different, the different facilities students are placed in, and those numbers are not negotiable. We can't call a private placement facility and say, we're having a hard time, we need a lower rate. Those are set through a process done with the state, and we've seen those numbers skyrocket this year at a rate that has not been seen before. In some cases, tuition going up 100% in 1 year, which is completely something we would not be able to project going forward at an accurate rate. But then also, it's if our bus company came and said, we're gonna give you 100% increase, we would say, thank you, we'll go out to bid. This is just, we don't have that control on these facilities that we do with some of our other services.
Do we know, what the projection of CPI is for 2025? I mean, we're more than halfway through the year now. Do we know what that number is?
Actually, prefer that hadn't happened set yet. They're looking at social security and waiting for the numbers to be released. I heard that just this week. That 26 CPI hasn't yet been.
So I know it hasn't been calculated, but there's somebody out there, these math geniuses, figuring out a necessity where it might come in.
So the most recent, oh, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say the most recent month that has been published was at 2.9%. That number does fluctuate more than you would think on a month-to-month basis, but some people that will put together projections for it who have usually been pretty close in the past within Tony and mine's line of work. I've seen estimates that it's going to be somewhere around 2.7 maybe by December.
So I just had a question. I also wanted to echo my colleagues' praise of the work that's been done at the CFC. I think it's really helped a lot. It's helped me immensely in wrapping my head around this. I do share Fred's reservations about a couple things, and I wonder about. I guess I'd like to hear a little more about the debate between 25 and 33%, and how much going by the 25 rule what would that look like for a household, that house of $400,000 if we apply that rule going forward? What's the difference in cost to the taxpayer? Be useful for me to know.
So if we to summarize this, the household doesn't necessarily get impacted by our fund balance percentage. But if we were looking at, say, no recapture, just what would that be? That would be scenario one, which would be the $104 on a $400,000 home, compared to the scenario 4 number of 132.
Oh, so scenario one is the 25%. Goes according to
Scenario one's just no recapture.
No, okay, well, no, I'm sorry, I'm not being clear. I'm referring to the recapture, and I'm and looking at holding for future years the 33%. And looking at our best practices to maintain between 25 and 50. What does it look like if we go with 25 as our base? Just to be more conservative about it, to I'd really like to know more about that discussion and what was driving.
For this year, it would still be the 104, 104, because we wouldn't be pushing down to that level on this fiscal year. We may end up with 1%, but we wouldn't be. We'd have to choose essentially to run a structural deficit to get to 25%. Like, we'd have to overspend to get down to that. I can tell you with where the projections go in the future, I could not sit up here and recommend that we do that, because that would push us below 25% every year after that. We just to go down to that 25% threshold on a non-recapture basis, what it would do would be holding the annual increases at CPI. So you'd be looking at the 2%. So in a similar $100 range, let's say, then and what we need to do then is we'd be not our reduction targets would change at that point to stay at the 25%.
Won't we have a better idea next year given that a large portion of our expenses are in personnel, and we're heading into bargaining for our largest bargaining unit, won't we have a better idea of what we're looking at annually year over year after that is solidified?
But we decided again next year.
No, I understand, but as, right, sure.
We're thinking that it's fine for this year.
No, I understand, but what I'm saying is that, you know, presuming that we're going to recapture all this money, we have a better idea. I guess we'll better be equipped to have a flatter or a better idea of our expenses moving forward next year.
So do you want to talk about the expiration on the recapture and the rationale behind the blended?
Yeah, it's, so yes, we will, but then we'd be like choosing to wait a year on the recapture two would mean that they're, depending on how CPI came in, we'd be more at risk than seeing those dollars sunset off, and we'd have to recapture more quickly in order to not have them sunset basically, because there's only a 3-year look back.
Okay, so if we're stuck to CPI 2%, for example, right, and we know that because our personnel expenses are going to go up by 3%, right, then we will be running a deficit. So we need that 2% plus to help offset the additional expenses that we have moving forward. Is that kind of how we're looking at it? And the money slowly trickles off the table as we move forward?
Yes, but I think instead of just looking at it as just like a 3% of personnel expenses, like we're more seeing it as a, total increased expense across the district.
Sure.
So yeah.
I would love to know how we frame this in one.
Actually, I want to give Audrey a chance to speak, and then I do have a couple of comments.
I want to see if you go ahead, who wants to say something, had a chance to say something. So I appreciate the discussion, appreciate the conversation, because we do have to keep a look at our expenses, and I also feel like there's so many unknowns that every year we're reevaluating and we're looking at what our current state actually is and trying to project out for 5 years what we're going to expect. And while we may have some things like special education may shift next year, personnel costs may go up next year, but then again, some things might go down. We just don't know. I think when I look at this recapture amount, and Fred asked a question of what would happen if we didn't have it, I think we would have kept taking the maximum, quite frankly. I don't believe in the district, because of that uncertainty, that we would have felt comfortable going below the maximum tax levy, and we would have done that as a way to keep a cushion. So from my perspective, the recapture gives us the ability to have some flexibility in the case of a situation like we're facing right now, where we really do need to try to do our best guess based on what we know right now around what will keep us comfortable from the standpoint of sustainable with our budget, and revisit it as we have more data and new data comes in with the next year. So similar to Kathleen, from my perspective, because we are using this for a genuine need, and not something from a spending standpoint, it makes me feel more comfortable. And I still agree that we need to look very carefully at our costs and our expenses and see where there might be opportunities. That said, I hope as a board, we will remember when our conversation 2 weeks ago, and lots of suggestions for ways to spend more money in some ways, that we're gonna have to make some trade-offs, make some hard decisions. Because when it comes to our expenses, there are lots of things we like to keep doing. We don't want to impact our employees, but we don't have to. We want to provide more for our students, but we just can't do everything. And so part of what we'll have to keep from a board standpoint around discipline, when we have to make hard choices about where cuts come, we're going to have to make those choices into the best of our ability.
So this is so exciting, this robust discussion by the board members. Kathleen and I, having been at CFC, we had our chance to deep dive. We were really looking forward to hear this exciting level of engagement. So first of all, a couple of comments on what we heard. I understand the skepticism about past boards patting themselves on the back for a levy less than inflation. When in reality, it's pretty easy to do that when those past boards had fund balances north of 100. So I keep coming back to, we're in this new world, we're in this new normal. We have this new environment we operate in, which is a right-sized fund balance. And also part of what's new is this recapture mechanism. And I understand Brother Fred's reticence to use the recapture mechanism. I understand that. But to really understand how it actually promotes fiscal conservatism, you have to rewind to the levy discussion 1 year ago for levy year 24, and even before that in 23. But if I look specifically at levy year 24, in our discussions, as I reviewed my notes, we were given a couple of scenarios. The most conservative one was go for 2.5 plus new growth, even though other options were presented to us as much as 3.4. So the mentality of the board, knowing that the recapture mechanism exists, becomes, let's take as little as we possibly can in our levy. Because we do have the safety mechanism of the recapture law, but we're not going to use it if we don't have to. And had we defaulted to probably a mentality that might have existed without that mechanism, that's a full percentage point higher, a year's worth of taxation on the community. So now you fast forward to where we are today. You got to recognize that the board was pretty conservative in its levy 1 year ago, but we have these new circumstances, and it's not just sped, it's also healthcare costs, which we discussed a lot lately. And Tim, I appreciate you recognizing the CFC, because scenario 4 came out, it was invented at the CFC meeting. It's terrific on a couple of points. Number one, it smooths out the impact to the taxpayer to the tune of about 0.8% of the tax on the community. Secondly, as Tony rightly pointed out, it's 3 years of $700K, but we don't have to do all 3 of those years. We could find out something has changed either on the cost or the revenue side, but we only end up doing the incremental additional $700K. But even if we did the full 2.1 million, it's still less than had we done the full boat recommendation in levy year 2024. And what I would say now is this new normal, you've got a normalized right-sized fund balance. You've got policy boundaries around the fund balance. We've established appropriate relevant financial peer districts. And we've also established appropriate metrics for our spending. Per pupil expenditures, salary, benefits, those are really critical to address things like you brought up, such as, do we have too many FTEs for our pupil headcount? So that's also part of our new model. And I think I'm pretty confident saying that there is no way there will not be belt tightening and tough choices made by this district going forward. What form they take can't yet be determined. We talked about rules in the toolbox and so forth. But I think the final comment I would say is the fact the recapture law exists, the fact we're using it is fiscally conservative. And I strongly would recommend that we take option 4 because our options change, because the new rigor and discipline we have around our spending. And also, as pointed out, it's a use it or lose it. That's one of the key reasons also that you want to do it right now. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we continue, I just want to stop for our student delegates. Any other questions? Do you have about this? So,
not exactly. Yeah, I wouldn't say one. It was very interesting conversation. Like you said, very tough choices to make. I see both sides. I just wouldn't have your answer, that's all.
There'll be more opportunities to hear about it. She comes to you.
She's just as excited as I am.
This is just a kickoff.
That's what you want. But I also want to offer to our government students, we are past 9 o'clock. We always say that if you need to leave, please do feel free to leave. You don't have to, but if you need to, please feel free for you all.
Okay, I might say a little longer because I'm only pretty much that.
Yeah.
Are we to the point where we're gonna try to gauge our consensus or are we?
Yeah, I was gonna think whether anyone had anything else, any other questions for Brian or Tony while we're around those comments.
I guess I still don't, I still don't feel like I have a good impression of what the discussion was between setting the preferred fund balance at 25.53. I mean, I know we have the assumption that the county is going to continue to be delayed, but it is an assumption. I would like to hear more about what was said about the merits of setting that at 25 instead of 33.
I'll jump in if you don't mind.
Sure.
Because we had that very question, we challenged, why 33, why not 30? A little bit below that. And it really has to do with the flow of liquidity from the county. We really don't want to be issuing special debt in order to cover day-to-day payroll type expenses. So unless I'm missing something, guys, that was kind of the main takeaway, because we really pushed on that point as well.
And it is a more conservative approach, with respect to the uncertainty with the county. They may get their act together, it's challenges with technology, but they may not. And what I'm hearing is that it's not, and perhaps Tony, you can speak to that, in terms of it's not, why it would not be desirable to have to do some sort of special debt to cover operating expenses.
Yeah, it's, if we went out and had issued tax anticipation warrants for 2 months of bills, it's a short-term debt issuance, but, it comes with an interest cost that, if we, borrowed, and I'm just gonna use an example, but let's say $10 million, we're gonna repay that 10 million plus, 2 to 4% interest on it, and then that's gonna drive our costs down. So it's, and depending on the timing as well, that comes over to your debt to income ratio as a district and bring bond rating down, things like that. It's never an ideal situation to issue a TAW. There's many districts that are there right now, we thankfully are not, Mr. Rosado, with you in that I hope once they get the technology up and running with Cook County that it works. I think my skepticism comes from 2 years ago or 3 years ago when things were late. We heard when they get their new technology, things will be up and running and they'll be on time, and this is that we're almost seeing pandemic levels of lateness at this point, which is a little inexplicable.
No, I agree. The last thing that did come to mind though is, and again, I don't want to hang my hat on it, right? I don't want to trust in a government program that could just easily not be there next year, right? Isn't Cook County issuing bridge loans at no interest currently for taxing values that have less than their current operating expense, right? I believe that there's a bridge loan that they're issuing as long as you had a credit rating above X or Y.
I have to look at that. I do not believe that's been made available to school districts. It may be other types of municipalities, and that's why it hasn't come across our desk. I have to go back and
We don't get it, right?
Right.
That's the right, so, we have to actually do that, right? So, and again, I wouldn't want to rely on it, but I guess just also adding an additional element to the fact that it doesn't necessarily have to be like a high interest, short bridge loan as an opportunity. Sometimes there are programs as backstops.
Just to
comment, I think, in response to Tim's question earlier, and Jonathan, maybe your point as well. So there's no argument about changing the lower bound on the policy, right? But I think this 33%, I really understand as a target, which is appropriate given, again, current circumstances. And I think, you know, our finance experts are telling us in order to feel comfortable going forward, where they feel comfortable is having 33% of the bank. And so, you know, we would still be within the policy, and if it ends up at 32 or 31, we're still well within the policy. But I think that's a target, you know, I'm really hearing Tony and Brian say that's a target that makes them feel comfortable with the financial position of the district. So I think, and also, if the county gets its act together and starts spending the money on time, we could revisit that target, like just because it's 33 in the 5-year projections now, doesn't mean it couldn't be 30 next year or 27 or whatever, may be appropriate depending on the timing of the revenue.
We have the same boundary at E97, and we would routinely bump along at about 27% on balances. But that was when the county was operating normal. And we're not, to your point, Kathleen, we're not trying to set a brand new floor of 33%. I think that's a number for right here and right now because of, you know, none of us have had a property tax bill this small yet.
So I would like to get a sense of kind of where's everyone's head about this? Just to kind of put it on the table, coming in, maybe about what you are with the recommendation.
I support scenario 4. I want to abide by the recommendation of the CAC and the administration.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly open to it. I remain, I guess, a little concerned about. I think we're gonna have to do a really good job in explaining this. You know, figuring out the right, succinct, clear, easy way to explain this, because I do think I can see how the optics on the recapture might not look good if we don't explain it properly. And I do think there's an onus on us to make sure we do that right out of the gates.
I'm on one, I'm with Fred, I don't think we have sharpened our pencils enough to, from an expense basis, to warrant that we have to get through this one. So I go with the no.
And, okay, come on, Fred. I don't know who you're, Fred?
Yeah, I'm, you know, I lean towards probably 1, but 4 is probably the more palatable of the other options, only because the recapture comes in over time. And if we find it in a subsequent year that we don't need it, we don't have to take it. So.
And I'm also supportive of scenario 4, for partially for the reasons that you say, and partially, as Kathleen shared with our finance experts and the work they've done and their understanding of the budget, and the fact that we will revisit this again next year to see what's needed. Thank you all for a very good discussion. It is important, the points that came up and things we'll have to keep in mind as we go forward. And we'll have more, I know Tony and Brian, you know, we'll have more on this, so. Thank you, I mean, to what's been said, great work on this, I really appreciate all of not just the effort that's gone into it, but the product that you delivered. I found it very clear and easy to follow, even when I was reading on my own, and something that shows some thought went into trying to consider, you know, giving us data to use as we think about this decision.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian. And I want to do a shift in the agenda. Before we get to governance, I actually would like to get to future agenda items, because there are just some things that we need some feedback from our district leadership team on, so I'd like to go ahead and cover those before we get into it.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I'm passing it down. The board knows these, just say, identify them. This is just a list of future agenda items that have been raised, this school year. If there's a future agenda item that a board member has raised in the past, and it's not on this list, it's because there's already been consensus from the board that they do want to see it, so we're calendaring those out. These are ones that there hadn't been consensus in the board that they want to see, that these are items that should come forward, and so for new board members, the process that we put in place with future agenda items last year was to, pull them all together, and when we had kind of a decent size of future agenda items that needed to be potentially scheduled, bring them back to the board for discussion. And so there are 6 items here that you're looking at, and I'm just gonna, so what we really need is an idea of whether these should be scheduled down the road. There's one, and they're all from the month of September. So there's one from transit exclusions, a TPE programming question, extracurricular programming demands from the community petition regarding the detracking initiative that was discussed a month ago. Safety updates for the school year specific, I believe, to the exterior hallway doors of bathrooms, and then remote tutoring options. So just looking for a quick idea on whether these are topics that want to come forward. And I just want to clarify too, the conversation here, like we aren't prepared as an admin team to dive into any of these topics with great detail. We just want to know if we should go do that diving. So
what it would be helpful is for each board member that has an agenda item that they recommended, is just talk as a reminder around what it is that you're looking for, so we can discuss whether or not we agree is something we want to add to the agenda. And so Kathleen, I'll start with you with transit exclusion.
Kick it off. Yeah, thank you. So I had raised this point after we had the discussion about the district taking the transit exclusion for this current academic year. And I think the request was, before we get that question again a year from now, can we take a look at what the costs would be of providing some transportation to students in the district who may need it, with the rationale being, well, we do have public transportation in the area for sure. I also know it isn't, certainly you wouldn't describe it as ample. So I think it's not always easy for kids to get here by public transportation, which means I think, there's a lot of cars on the road. It's crowded. There are potentially safety issues around the building during, especially the morning drop off. There's sustainability considerations because it's a lot of individual cars driving here, which could potentially be replaced by one bus. So that was sort of the rationale behind the request. I think it would be good to take a look at what would the impact be in terms of getting cars off the road, in terms of making kids' lives a little bit easier, in terms of getting here predictably and reliably. I have a kid who tries to commute on the Ridgeland bus, and I can tell you that is a recipe for a very early departure from home where we're at Target on most days. So, and I know, we had discussed it really briefly. Obviously, there are significant costs involved, so that would be, additionally complicated by the discussion we just had about reducing costs over time. But I still think it would be worth taking a look, because I think there are many families who struggle with getting their kids here, especially those that live far from the school.
The CPE programming, that came up for a variety of reasons. Certainly it seems like a great opportunity to have the conversation with Dr. Hester, being new to the position. But I think there's, I feel like we could really use a deep dive into where we're at right now with our CTE offerings. I'd like to gain more of a perspective on the work we've done to align with community industries and opportunities, and to really look at what's within our arm's reach industry-wise, and how we are really taking advantage of that, and and collaborating with those companies to provide apprenticeships and to look at those opportunities. I just really want to have a better idea that we're the work we're doing there to really synthesize our environment and apply that to the actual curriculum that we offer here. So that's one thing. I also think there's, we have been doing a great job in several ways. We've seen the burgeoning partnership with Triton be very fruitful. I think there's a lot of exciting things happening there. I'd like to know more about how that can continue to be expanded. I know we at one point we're in discussions with city colleges. I understand there's very regional fiefdom issues around vocational tech stuff. So I understand why that fell apart. But I don't think there's necessarily a binding legality though to working with only one, correct? It's more of a norm. I believe we can talk about that later, but that's one thing I want a little clarity on. Because they're very distinct offerings, different offerings at both both outfits. And also just looking at this gets back to my I know I'm always asking for different methods of inquiry, but really what we're doing to connect with our existing student base and how that's informing the type of CT offerings that we're putting together. I'd like to see listening tours be the norm with our students and really, really getting a better idea of what students want to pursue in the CT area and make informed decisions in our curriculum about that. I know that there's been some pretty exciting case studies where districts that do that not only provide better opportunities for their students, but simultaneously address some pretty nagging problems like chronic absenteeism, which is certainly an issue that we're certainly looking to ameliorate sooner than later. And there's a lot of very compelling evidence that more deliberate, meaningful work in CT actually helps to abate that significantly. So I think it's a very relevant thing for us to take a deep dive into. I'm eager to do it, and I hope you all agree.
I want to pause for a moment. So should that be up for Kathleen, but before we move on, just want to get a sense from the board with respect to these two items on the mass transit exclusion. Is there agreement about having this come forth to understand more what the cost would be and what would be involved?
I think we have to get clear first. Are we talking about, I want the board to talk about this, or I want the administration to do something? Because the context of the exclusion coming up, that's more of an administrative thing to say yes or no. But if we want to have a talk about this topic more broadly, I think we do that. I'm in support of that, but I'm not in support of telling administration go to a bus study. So I'd be delighted to talk about how do kids get to school kind of holistically. But I'm not sure what mission we would give the administration.
But how can we have the discussion about what it would cost to what the alternative would cost?
Well, defining those range of alternatives is what I think we want to talk about as a group, because to commission a bus study is a large and expensive endeavor. And I think we would want to talk about things like, do we want to pressure pace more directly? Do we really want a bus study? Or it's not even that binary. Are there other things we can do for different parts of our communities getting to school? So it feels like more than initially a holistic discussion for us as a board to even know what we would ask the administration to do.
Other thoughts? Okay, Kathleen, Jim.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that makes, I think just having the conversation about what may be possible would be a great start. I also just wanted to ask before we start signing off on which one of these we support. Do we need this as a menu, like just in terms of capacity of the administration? Do we get consensus on all of these? Is that a problem, or would two be good, or I mean, just give us some guidance on how.
We here at OPRF have an unlimited capacity.
Oh, that's fine. That's great to hear. We haven't discussed that as an admin team, and I very much appreciate being cognizant of that, but
I'm not prepared to give you a number, you know, that's concrete, but I appreciate it.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think I was in the past when we have agreed for things, then we can get a better sense based on what it is that we agree to, if we agree to it. Versus of what it would involve and the, like, when might it come before the board because of just the capacity and the ability of the team, given everything that we already have on our agenda. When might this be able to appear?
So then, to Graham's point, so then for, I guess you kind of use the same methodology for all these, right? So do we want this as a discussion item? I think that's the question. Do we want this as a discussion item where whoever may be raising it would do a little homework on their own about some of the options and we put it on the agenda and we have a kind of robust discussion on the choices. And then if it comes out that we do want to explore it as an action item, then we move from there. Is that kind of fair that we're looking at?
That's kind of where I'm at, because even for us to discuss anything as a group, we have to officially make it an agenda.
Right, even for discussion.
Even if all we agree is talk about it.
But that's the question. The first I was putting on the discussion item.
That's why I was at her so far. I mean, about Fred or Tim or Jonathan, or you all.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely, it sounds more like a former than the latter, as Graham pointed out, it was first one to get it started anyway. But yeah, I'm certainly, it's important.
Fred, do you have a comment?
And we're talking regarding the transit solution.
Yeah, because I think
Yeah.
it's such an item.
Well, I'm with Graham to have a discussion about it, I'm fine with that. But I wouldn't at this point charge the administration to do anything with it at this point, other than if there's some, information they can provide us.
And I know there was.
Some general information of what, because I mean, just being around high schools for a very, very long time, there's a vast, spectrum of what different schools do and what they provide.
I think that's a good point. I know there's some preliminary work that the team had done that had looked at some information that could be a starting point for discussion. Do you have anything? Maria? All right, so here I'm going to end that discussion. And then just going to the CTE, I guess the question that I have is anything like this already planned or on the radar for the district team?
I think it's an incredibly worthwhile topic. We've given presentations on this before. I think 2 years back was our last. It's totally appropriate that we present, especially when you consider one additional factor that John you didn't mention is that we have a new division head who's in charge of CTE, right? So I think bringing that forward makes sense, and I see Dr. Esther nodding back there. So I can't promise when it'll be, but I think it makes sense to bring it forward.
Everyone good with that on the CTE? And then Graham, next one is you.
I'm doing some independent work on this. I think nothing's needed right now. I'm gonna confer with Greg on some data, and then after that, we'll determine. There's a item to be had there.
And then next, Fred, is the demands for community petition.
I don't like that word demand. Request, I think. No, I think that the receiving the petition in the comments that were made a few weeks ago. I for one would like to have a discussion about their comments. They talked basically about two different things. One is expansion of supports, and the other was to have some type of a committee, independent committee, around achievement. So I think that's to have that discussion. Right, I see it is very valid work.
Everyone good with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll add that as an agenda item for discussion.
I do have a question for clarity on that part, Fred. So I'll use a framework that Graham mentioned just a moment ago regarding the transit exclusion. Is this something that you would like the administration to prepare something for and bring forward? Or is this something you simply want the board to discuss?
I think the first step is just the board to discuss.
Okay, thank you.
Because, again, if it doesn't go any further than that meeting, we wouldn't, why would we want you to invest any time and effort in?
Okay, thank you. Claire.
And just within the last two are for you.
So,
Back indoors,
I'll go backwards just because of the topic. The remote tutoring, I think, kind of falls in a similar vein as supports. So I think that, again, not the board, but, I would do some homework. We would pick around kind of the idea of exploring some options. How do we make, outside of the classroom education or support available to the most amount of students for the most cost effective manner. So I think that's exploring and everyone's schedules are crazy, being here in a tutoring center, which is great. I'm going to take away from the value that offers, but I know that it's not for everyone also, and having all the other opportunities.
for Josh.
Okay, and then the other one was, kind of the, Edward's discussing budget. What I was thinking more is I wanted to see, and not immediately, but, it may be closer towards the end of the semester, if we've seen, a tick down in issues regarding bathrooms, as a result of removing the external doors. And if not, do we need to explore an additional safety investment, whether that's some sort of a devices. So that's where that is. I mean, if there's no, I'd like to know if the students feel safe, and if they don't feel safe, then I think we need to do more in that regard.
So are you asking for warnings on both those things?
Yeah, I'd like to, honestly, I'd just like to hear if we, surveyed people, if we understand, because I know there's the initial kind of fallout, what have you, but do we think that it's making a difference? Is this making bathrooms more accessible and safer for students to feel safer in the halls? Or do we, is it not a big cause and source of anxiety and concern with safety? Do we need to do more to make sure there's, loitering or, aggression or maybe bathrooms?
Okay, but so it's really a report on what we found.
Yeah, where was this effective? Do we need to do something else? Yes.
Okay. And then on the remote tutoring, are you sort of, are you including that in your thinking about the freshman curriculum initiative? Is that
amongst others? Yes.
Part and parcel of that conversation?
That is part of that, in the sense that, we need additional supports for students that are struggling. I think that we saw that, that one of the, at the last board meeting, we're seeing that some students are struggling and that they need those supports, and we talked about investing it. And I thought that remote tutoring, giving access to assistance might be an effective, cost-effective way to give people that have, say, sports and whatnot, access to help outside of the four walls of the school, and outside of normal business hours.
I guess my reaction to that is, and Fred's idea as well, is I think we're gonna hear additional reporting from the administration this school year about Honors for All and curriculum altogether. And I wonder if both of those issues aren't just better suited to be part of that conversation that we have when we get that additional reporting.
Yeah, I actually. I think that remote tutoring is one specific way to potentially support students, right? Some of which is already going on, but it's one specific way. And I think there's a question here that needs to be looked at holistically, right? How are we as a district supporting our students? There was really, and I talked with members of SEAT, regarding that question prior to this. There's an assertion there that we need additional supports. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe supports that we do have in place in various places in the school need to be kind of revisited or shifted, or, use the analogy of sharpening the pencil, something like that. And so that question, I think, is the one that we really want to go after here. And I think this is very much in sync with conversations I've had with Dr. Hester recently about thinking about the initiatives that we have in place from a curricular perspective, more from our overall instructional core, our overall programming for our students. What are we doing to provide, a rich depth, quality education for our students that we can, increase to a scale that's going to benefit more and more students over time. And so I think this conversation is part of that kind of lens for us as a district right now and as an admin team. And exactly how we would package that up and bring that forward. Yes, I've had side conversations with Tim, and some of our, about this idea. I'm happy to bring them up right here too in this context. But exactly where we are going and how we would kind of package that and bring that to the board, I don't think we've settled on as an admin team yet. Dr. Esser, you and I have had these conversations. Is there anything you want to add into that conversation or shift anything that I've said?
I think it's just really how we look at overall school improvement.
Yeah.
And then making improvements at scale. Because that's really what a lot of these conversations have been about, is how do we make improvements at scale?
Can I answer? I have a similar question that Tim just had for you, Josh. Would it be accurate to say that you're interested just explicitly in remote tutoring, or that you're interested in tutoring options, including remote?
In the second is better description. I saw remote tutoring or AI tutoring as being a more cost effective perhaps way than additional, hiring additional tutors and expanding the bodies. But yes, I mean, the first thing is, and I'd go even a step further back, right, to Dr. Johnson. I think the first question is support. And what does it look like? But the remote tutoring was an idea of an effective way to offer support.
But I also agree that it is directly in sync with one of the requests from the community delegation a couple of weeks ago. So I just think it's relevant, and I think it's something we should be looking at. So yeah.
I was gonna say, would Josh would be comfortable with having it as, kind of integrate to understanding how we're supporting our students more broadly. But I don't want to do anything standalone, relative to, kind of what's the bigger picture, or even just understanding what we already have and what might need to shift or what could change in different ways. So I think just looking at it from an overall support perspective.
Yeah, you're saying, I don't need my baby to be a topic. Right? Like, if we're addressing it, and that's included as part of the address of identifying gaps and how we fill those gaps, 100% perfectly fine. I'm okay. So you're on time, is it? I threw that out as an idea, and I would like that to be explored. If we do need to explore, additional supports outside of classroom time, in the form of supplemental education via tutoring, I'd like to explore remote tutoring as well.
Is tutoring still too narrow in your view? I think it's better to look at in the full context of supports.
I do, yes.
I'm interested in the topic of tutoring because research supports it. It's tied to honors for all. There's an element in EDF, and there's a CFC sub-team right now tackling the topic of tutoring and a gap analysis. But I'd probably defer, to your advice there, putting it on supports context.
So yeah, so I'd be perfectly fine removing that as a specific item for an agenda moving forward.
Yeah. And Josh, what are the doors and safety? Is there something around the safety more broadly and how students are going in school?
People more like, lots of, I wanted to, I think we made a great step forward in improving bathroom safety, which was an issue for a lot of students. I would just like to make sure that we circle back and reevaluate, make sure these guys.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Was it?
No, I understand.
So I just want to summarize what I heard. Remember, we want to make sure that we're on the same page. So with respect to the transit solution, we will add that as an agenda item for us to discuss more as a board, and from there we can just, determine what might be any next steps. For CTE programming, it is something that doesn't need a copy before the board, so Dr. Johnson, Dr. Hester, will get that scheduled as a future agenda item. With respect to the myself here, we're doing more work on extracurricular programming, so we're doing a bit more research there on your own. Demands for community petition, I do agree with Brett. I do think it's something that we need to discuss as a board, just given it was a direct request from some of our community members, and so I would propose that we do have that added as a discussion, as a discussion item for the board. And I think, if there's additional information for it that may be helpful for us to have as part of the discussion, we can talk about that. And then,
Audrey, can I just add with that particular one sooner than later?
Yes.
Like, I wouldn't wanna see us push that one out.
Okay.
I think we should get to that as soon as reasonably possible.
Okay. And then as we just discussed with both, safety, with both back doors and safety, just really understanding the efficacy of what's been done, kind of how students are feeling and where they are, having that as part of a broader discussion about safety, and then we've got updates on that, and then also saying, for remote options for tutoring, having that as part of the discussion of how we provide support to our students. Are you getting ready with that?
I think I'm clear, yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you for moving that.
Oh, absolutely, I think it's a good discussion, I want to make sure we can have it with your team here, we have to stay all night, so.
That's right, yeah.
Let's move back to board governance, and the one piece of the governance were goals, and these are on handouts.
Yeah, one table.
Can you grab those, Kathleen? Yeah, find out.
I want to take a moment to invite the back row to ice and walk to your right. I also want to acknowledge in this little moment here, we actually earlier tonight and right now we still have student delegates from our younger grade levels and not seniors, which is great to see. So we had 5 here earlier tonight, 2 remain, real troopers.
What's this about?
Well done. Oh, this goes here too. So thank you for coming out.
Do you want to introduce yourselves so we know who you are?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tyson, that's Sander, what else to say?
What year are you?
We're both freshmen, me and Sander run our freshman class council, so it's.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Glad you're here. Thrilled to have you here.
Yeah.
Grab a cookie.
It is that, so that everything else will be. I'm just going to start today, with respect to the board goals, we talked about this quite a bit, and we get the feedback from the district leadership team. We've done updates. What I will say about this, is please review them, and if you have any questions, please get back to me, like right away, and I'm gonna, we should post them next week, so we can have our goals in place and we can start working our goals. But if you go through the glance right now, if anything comes to mind, if you want more time to go through them in detail, we can do that as well. But would like by early next week to get a point, we get these posted so by Monday. If there's any other comments or feedback, if you look through everything, let me know. Thank you for coming along.
Can I say something tonight?
Absolutely.
Be a little unpopular, given the long list of future agenda items that we just generated. But we did in the academic achievement and school environment area simplified down to two board goals,
Right.
both of which I think are well aligned with some of the agenda items that we just talked about in terms of both the curricular questions and the safety perceptions and safety actions. I think that's aligns really nicely. There are a few things here that we said, let's pull from the goals, but see them resurface as future agenda items. One of which is career pathways, I think we're covered there really well. But AI, we didn't talk about that, that's a potential future agenda item, and then also the professional development, the kind of overview of the professional development that's happening in the building, so maybe we need to put that on the list for future agenda items.
I think that's a great, and Greg, is there anything planned, with respect to AI? Sorry, because you were not full.
Thank you, sorry for that. Yes, we've been working on AI guidelines, protocols, examining current policies and make sure that they're prepared to support these guidelines and practices. For both for families, students, teachers, so we're hoping to bring that forward in November, actually next month.
Great. And with respect to just the professional development activity, do you have any discussion about?
We have a lot of conversation about that. Dr. Hester here, who I had just a few minutes ago, invited to go home for the evening. We've talked a lot about that, and she's really interested in understanding better how that lives, our current kind of programming for professional development lives in school, and doing a bit of a needs assessment during the school year. So I would anticipate something. We would be prepared for a much more informed approach that's going to be a little bit more forward leaning than it otherwise could be near the end of the school year rather than early.
Yeah, good point, Jane. Yeah, that's great.
Thank you.
Yep.
And if there's nothing else in the goals, remember, please get back to me any changes on Monday, and Lisa, I'll follow up with you regarding getting these finalized when we get back. And then finally, just for information purposes, the school profile is included in our documents. And I'm going to just move quickly to our district and community update reports. And I sent something out, I'll start first, I sent something out from iGov, and we've been having a lot of conversations about immigration, about ICE, and just some of the unfortunate challenges that are happening within our community. I did include information that the Village of Oak Park is adopting or is planning to propose an ordinance around not being able to use village property for any kind of staging or any kind of cooperation from ICE perspective. I understand Berwin has adopted something, and they're asking around the table basically whether or not other governing bodies would consider, doing something similar, or how might they be able to continue to help protect, their staff, their schools, or students, et cetera. But that continues to be a big topic of discussion.
Is it specifically ICE or any federal agency?
I think it may be, I just had to go back and see what, I got a copy of how it's been summarized. It might be more broad, but I don't recall. Okay, I did include that in my notes though, the actual language that they are proposing. That's probably the main thing with that. What about anyone else in the updates from your group? I know John, you were saying his community council.
Yeah, we actually had ironically, we had a really nice discussion about Title I. It was a small but mighty group of community council. We had a really nice discussion about Title I, about programming, and more generally too, a presentation about our multi-tiered systems of support and conversation around that. So yeah.
I think we've already spoken at length about the PFC and you saw my email earlier, so nothing further to add on this.
Just one update from the Workforce Community Collaboration. D90 is in extended contract negotiations with their faculty, and the last update from this last meeting was that they are in mediation. their federal mediator is furloughed because of the federal government shutdown. So they had intentionally chosen a date at the end of October, assuming that the government shutdown would be over by the time of that date. I think it's next week. So, they continue to be, in discussions and mediation. I only have a vague understanding of what the outstanding issues are there, and just for FYI, for this group, I don't believe that there's any correlation with that delay and those negotiations and what we see here. Completely different issues, I would anticipate, so I think we should be drawing everything from that.
Thanks. Anyone else in the other meetings attended and meeting schedule? All right, and we've already covered future agenda items. So, I, Audrey Williams-Lee, move to adjourn at 10:01 p.m.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you. And again, thanks to our student delegates for sticking it out.
Yeah.